Hello! Welcome back everybody, or welcome to if you're new. Today I wanted to do a little bit of a catch up of what I've been reading this year. It's been a long time since I've been able to talk about what I've been reading. I have 8 books to talk about with you. Yes, 8 books. So these are my January to March reads. I definitely have a lot less time to read than I have ever had, and I'm really trying to take my time with the things that I'm reading and not try and rush through them and make sure that reading is still a hobby that is relaxing and therapeutic for me. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. So the first book that I read this year was House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. When Sarah came out with this trilogy, I kind of told myself, you know what, I'm probably not gonna read it. I remember when I got to the end of the ACOTAR series, just not quite vibing with her writing anymore. I feel like it kind of departed from being very, you know, fantastical and story based and exciting, and became a lot more adult and a lot more focused around how hot everybody is. And I just, you know, I guess everyone goes through an evolution with their writing, but I just wasn't particularly feeling it anymore. So when I heard that she was doing an urban fantasy adult series, I kind of already knew, okay, that's not gonna be for me. Sorry, my clip was pulling on my hair weirdly. Oh, also I have it's just been Easter, I have one of these lint things attached to my wrist, so if you hear a bell, that's what it is. I can't undo the knot and I don't have the heart to cut it off yet because my brother tied it on for me. Yeah, so I knew that the Crescent City series initially wasn't going to be for me. I did end up reading the first one last year because it was the only Sarah J. Maas book on my bookshelf where I lived that I hadn't read, and I was missing like the feeling of her writing a little bit. Kind of was what I was expecting, very focused on people getting jiggy. The plot was not very concise. It felt really like it wasn't what I have liked from her writing in the past. So initially I went, I don't think I'm gonna keep going, but then this book came out and I wasn't planning on reading it, and I kept seeing TikToks and Instagram reels semi-spoiling how this book ends, and because of that I was like, okay, maybe I'll keep going. If you've read this, you know why probably I was motivated. If you haven't, some characters that I really enjoy make an appearance at the end of this book. So I read it, yeah, and that ending that I was waiting for, I was super excited for. Sarah's definitely very good at finishing up her books and kind of building tension at the end of her books, but I felt like I was waiting the whole book for that. This book is way too long. A lot of the book is people standing around talking about what they could do for just an unnecessarily long amount of time, and I just found myself getting bored by these people meeting up with each other and talking about things. I didn't really feel connected to the romance between the main 2 characters, Bryce and Hunt. In Sarah's other books, which I think were more young adult, there was less sex scenes, and because of that I felt like her romantic relationships had like just a lot of like tension, and there was a lot of build up, and there was a lot of reason why those characters were together. And in this book I felt like within 2 seconds Hunt and Bryce had decided that they were really into each other and started getting it on like every chapter, and that's a fine and a valid way to start a relationship, but I felt like some of the writing of why I should be rooting for Bryce and Hunt to be together was sacrificed, because it felt like Sarah went, okay, I'm writing adult fantasy, that means I can be as explicit as I want and I'm going to do that. It got to the point where I was just completely skipping the scenes because I was just cringing so hard. There was, and I'm not going to say between which characters it was, because if you do want to read this and this is your cup of tea, then I don't want to spoil it. There was one romantic relationship in this book that began that I was getting that feeling that I used to get from Sarah's old videos. I did end up reading the third book this year, so when I get to that I'll tell you how I felt about how that accumulated, but there was that kind of, okay, this relationship isn't based on us just being physically attracted to each other, there's something else there as well. That did start in this book. Yeah, but this book definitely felt like one of those cases where an author gets really big and famous and the quality of their work just goes down. I found that's happened a little bit with some of my favourite authors that I used to read when I was a teenager, of they get really famous and suddenly their books just aren't as good, or maybe that's me growing, but I do, you know, reread her first two series, Throne of Grass and Akatar, every now and again, and I still love those, and that might be a nostalgia factor as well, but yeah, it just felt like it was really long. The relationships weren't developed as well, I wasn't as attached to any of the characters. Things were just getting resolved out of nowhere, and something that I really used to like from Sarah's books was how she could like drop breadcrumbs of how things were going to be solved at the end, and it felt like there wasn't that in this book. So yeah, I was in a position where I didn't enjoy the book, and I feel like I've kind of detached myself from being excited about Sarah's writing, but because of how it ended and the characters that were involved in the ending, I knew I was like, I'm gonna read the third one, I know I am. Then I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Leigh Bardugo is the author who wrote Six of Crows, Shadow and Bone, and this is her first, what do we call this? It's adult, dark academia, fantasy, literary fiction. I just want to have a moment for how this book opens. The opening line is just killer. By the time Alex managed to get the blood out of her good wool coat, it was too warm to wear it. Like, what a great way to start a book. So in this book we follow Galaxy Ardern, who is a girl with a very traumatic background who can see ghosts, who has been asked by a secret society at Yale to help them in monitoring the shenanigans of the secret societies on the Yale campus. And this kind of magic and rituals and a mystery involving a murder of a dead girl. Yeah, I thought this had some really cool like concepts in it. I found the writing really great as well. I feel like Leigh Bardugo's writing, because I've read actually everything else that she's written beyond the continuation of this series, and it's been really great to watch her writing develop and become more mature and more interesting and more kind of like deep, I guess, in terms of intricacy and just using writing as an art style. I did feel like it was the tiniest bit slow in the middle. You know, there was kind of a point where I was like, okay, I'm about to be bored. And I did at times find it difficult to keep track of the different names of the houses of Yale that Alex is supposed to be keeping a watch on. I think definitely if you're planning on reading this one, have a look at the trigger warnings, because like I said, Alex does come from quite a traumatic background, and for what Leigh Bardugo was trying to achieve, I don't think she went too far on describing what some of that trauma was, but it is definitely described. I'm personally not someone who likes to read books that go really in depth on, you know, traumatic things happening to characters that we're involved with, and this didn't cross any lines with me, but there are definitely topics that could definitely be triggering described in this book, so definitely have a look at those warnings before you read it if you're interested. I did enjoy the plot twist at the end. I thought that was quite well done. It's got a very kind of grungy and dark feeling to it, and I also like what Leigh Bardugo does with her romance, where got a coffee delivery. What was I saying? Yeah, I like when a main female character in Leigh Bardugo's books is falling in love. Her whole life does not become about the male character that she is falling in love with. She's still, you know, it's very much so like a background thing that's happening for the character, and I kind of like that, because they still have a life and they're still themselves and they're still independent. And that's not to say that the main character in this book is falling in love. There's definitely hinted at relationship happening, but it's not, I've met this person 3 times and now I can't live without them, which I appreciate. Very interesting exploration of kind of that existential theme of death in this book as well, which I thought was kind of interesting. Okay, so I don't actually have this particular book anymore. So then I read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I've seen these books around a lot and I've heard them talked about a lot. So I figured, you know, I'm gonna give it a try. It wasn't quite my cup of tea, my cup of coffee, but it was very, very cute. It was very whimsical, very, you know, focused on like, it felt like, you know, it's like candy and foxes and forests and cupcakes and princesses. Like it's, if I'd read this when I was like 13, 14, just a little bit younger, I think I would have lost my mind over this book. And, you know, objectively looking at it, I think it's a good book. It was written well. It is aimed at kind of maybe a younger audience quite well. A little bit corny, a little bit cliche maybe to me. It definitely felt like at times it was going, okay, what do audiences like? So they like main male love interest with an attitude that is only nice to her main female character with a different colour hair, vampires suddenly out of nowhere, evil stepsister. You know, it had things like that, but it was still enjoyable. I zipped through it. I read it quite happily. I wasn't upset that I was reading it. But I don't have it on my shelves anymore. I try not to keep books that either don't have sentimental value or that I don't look at and go, oh yeah, you know, and feel joy. And that book wasn't meeting that for me. Yeah, it did feel like there were a lot of times when I was kind of kicking my feet and going, oh, gee, okay. And also times when the writing was very simple, but there were times when it felt like the author was being a little bit confusing and flip-flopping back and forth about what the main character and other characters' motivations were for some of the plot twists she was trying to set up. And it got to the point where I was kind of like, okay, I feel like we need to pick something to focus on, pick a plot twist, pick a main line to follow, and then follow that. I felt like the main character was constantly coming up with a hypothesis about what was going on and then racing to prove that, being proven wrong, and then being proven right, and then coming up with an idea, you know, just kind of jumping around a lot. We follow a young girl called Evangeline. I'm actually not remembering. So she asks a spirit or a god to help her. Her stepsister is marrying the love of her life, and she believes that the love of her life has had a curse placed on him by potentially her stepmom. So she asks I believe he's a god called Jax, to help her out. But in this world, the gods are very tricky, and just a bunch of shenanigans happen because of that. I think it's always interesting to read books that are insanely popular on kind of book talk, or booktube, or on Bookstagram, because I have personally found that a lot of those books are books that younger me would have loved, like would have absolutely agreed about the hype around. So it makes me think that maybe it is younger me, you know, that demographic of kind of just getting into reading and just finding out what that joy of reading is, having a platform to express that on much more easily than younger me may have been able to do that, and a much bigger platform as well, which I think is absolutely amazing. I don't think I'll keep reading the series because it wasn't my cup of tea, but if what I've said sounds like it would be good for you, if you really like that very simple, maybe a little bit cliche but fun writing, then 100% I encourage you to give it a shot. And then the third book in Crescent City came out. Let me just break my arm trying to lift it up. House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. I was not ultra excited for this book, but I felt like I had to read it quickly because I knew that it was going to be all over the internet and I was going to be getting smacked with spoilers in the face within weeks. And there were threads in the second book where I was excited to see how they were tied up and to see how they would develop. And I am glad that I read it and I got it out of the way, although I don't know if that's because I didn't get spoiled or because I'm just glad that it's over. And I'm so devastated because I used to, I still do love some of Sarah's older books so much, but this was just torture. This book was so long. Look at that. And I feel like if it had just been condensed down a little bit more, not a little bit, a lot more, I would have enjoyed it way more. There were some interesting plot points and cool things that did happen in this book, but there was so much fluff and nattering and sex scenes that happened in between those cool plot points that I just didn't care by the time I got to them. And there were good ideas in the book about how the magic was being developed and how the plot points were going to be kind of resolved, but it felt like there were so many different ones being crammed into one book that none of them were properly fully developed, and I wasn't invested in any of them, and it just got confusing, and it felt like this book was written without planning, on the fly, and then very lightly edited and sent to the publisher. It might have been because I felt like there were way too many characters that we were seeing the perspective of in this book that I just couldn't get invested in any of them really, because there was constantly flip-flopping around, and it did feel like at times Sarah was kind of making up the rules for the magic systems in her book and coming up with new, like, oh, well, this character is this, so this character can actually do this, which is very convenient for what's happening right now, and I don't like that. The writing felt a bit lazy. There were a lot of, you know, fantasy cliches, and like I said for the second one, it feels like now that she's writing adult books, it means that she's gone, well, I don't have to build up romantic tension anymore because my characters can just have sex on the page. And that romantic relationship that I was excited about in the second book just went the exact same way as all of the others did. There was no tension in this book. They decided they liked each other and that was it. Like, it was like, wow, I'm completely and 100% in love with you now. Yeah. I did like that one. My favourite character in this book and in the other books is the Hind, and one of the reasons why I like her is kind of a spoiler, so I'm going to hold the book right here for a second, so if you don't want to hear the spoiler you can just kind of zoom forward until the book's not held here anymore. I like that the Hind has kids. I think that's a really cool touch. I like that she's a single mother and she's still like out there defeating the world, but again, just felt like there was too much going on. It was too cliche, it was too everything was happening like that, and I was just supposed to believe it, and I wasn't invested. Spoilers over. Yeah, so I didn't enjoy it, and I was sad that I didn't enjoy it, and it makes me wonder if I will ever pick up any more Sarah J. Maas, because her writing has definitely gone to a place that I don't enjoy as much anymore. Then I took a complete 180 on what I was reading. After that, I read The Tale of Pooh and the Day of Piglet by Benjamin Hoff. So this book is so interesting. It explores the concepts of Tao and Day, which are kind of central to Buddhism, through anecdotes and stories from Winnie the Pooh, which sounds like a really obscure idea, but it just worked so well. And Winnie the Pooh is definitely something that I grew up watching and reading, so I had that nostalgic, like, oh, feeling, as well as I find learning about philosophies from different places and different cultures and different religions super interesting, and I feel like this explained some of those main concepts really, really well. So it's technically two books, so the Tao of Pooh was originally one book by itself, and then The Day of Piglet was one book by itself. I definitely enjoyed the first part a lot more. It felt like in the second part things got a little more political on behalf of the author, and I think a lot of, from what I gathered from this book, a lot of the reason that he wrote this book was because he feels like the world is in a bit of a lost place, and my understanding as someone who's just beginning to learn about the concept of Tao and Day and Buddhism is that there's definitely a component of being connected to the world, to nature and to each other that has perhaps been lost in the modern age. And a little bit in the first book, but then a lot in the second book, he was really pushing, look how lost we currently are, look at the climate and what we're doing to it, look at what we're doing to each other, look at how much is going into armies instead of looking after the world around us, which I do agree with. But the second book felt like it was focused more on that than talking about Day. But I definitely enjoyed, and if you're someone who's wanting to learn more about some of those core concepts of Buddhism, I think this is a great way to do it, especially if you are someone who grew up on Winnie the Pooh like me. There were some really like wholesome, like, stories in there that were linked really well with those concepts, and makes you wonder if the person who wrote Winnie the Pooh was aware of them. Oh, and then I read some really good books. Then I read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This one was another one that was kind of recommended highly on the internet, which did make me feel a little bit cautious because I have been betrayed by internet recommendations before, but I really enjoyed this. This was so fun and simple and easy and interesting. Completely different like plots and settings, but it reminded me a lot of Sorcerer of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, which is one of my favourite books. It just had that kind of like really cozy, well written, not convoluted fantasy feeling. So we follow a young woman called Iris. It's kind of like a 1940s setting, and there's a war going on between two gods in the land, and the people in the world are being conscripted to fight in those wars for the different people. And Iris and this fellow here, Roman, are journalists with typewriters who become wrapped up in that conflict. And the typewriters are magical, and there's a little bit of romance going on, and I feel like it's really nicely written. It just felt really nice to not be thinking about flaws in the writing or plot holes that I'd spotted or being annoyed by the main character or the love interest. It was just, I just enjoyed it. It felt like there was a proper, solid, respectful, wholesome base to the relationship that develops between the two kind of main characters, and I appreciate that so much. Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about this because it was just genuine enjoyment. I found the characters easy to connect to. I found the setting super interesting, like magical warfare in the 1940s from the eyes of a journalist with a magical typewriter. Like, yeah, I liked the characters. There were some scenes that were really wholesome. There were some scenes that were really sad. Yeah, I felt chill reading this book. And I definitely plan to read the next one, which is Ruthless Vows, I believe. And then I read another really good one, maybe one of my favourite books of this year, The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Ardern. So this one is based on Russian folklore, and we follow a young girl who can see the spirits and the little creatures and monsters that are a part of that folklore where the people around her can't. She lives in a little snowy village in the woods. It's very winter. I felt so immersed in the time and the culture and the folklore that this book was kind of following. It didn't feel like there was any like breakaways from that. There was no, if you told me that someone from that time had written down this story and then Katherine Ardern had come along and just kind of modernized the language a little bit and not have people saying doth and thou and things like that, then I would believe you. I loved reading about all the like little spirits that live in the house, like in the oven, and the spirit that lives in the stable to look after the horses, and the spirit that looks after the trees in the forest. I find it so interesting to read about the folklores and the spiritualities that different cultures really like believed in, and what practices they did to like look after themselves and the land and protect each other, and what they thought would happen if you neglected that. And I feel like that this book explores, you know, how this particular part of Russia thought about that so well and so interestingly, and I was so engaged in the plot. I found the main character Vasya, she's got that like manic pixie dream girl vibe, but she's not annoying. We do get a couple different point of views outside of Vasya's point of views, but none of them I was rolling my eyes out when I saw the next page. Okay, now we're from Constantine's point of view, and it is very interesting. One of the characters is a Christian priest who is sent to the town to kind of, he's sent for a number of reasons, and how he then interacts with the people and the folklore already established there, and the different kind of perspectives that brings into play. The writing was superb, there were beautiful metaphors. I really enjoyed the ending. It felt a little bit like I had some unanswered questions, like it felt like a strange ending, but I feel like that suited the story really well, and I wasn't mad that I didn't have every question answered. I believe the book continues into a sequel based on a little excerpt in the back of that book. I'm not in a rush to read the second one because I feel really satisfied with that experience of reading that book, but definitely if I see any Katherine Ardern out and about in the stores, then I will be picking her up because that was amazing. Katherine Ardern seems like a really interesting person too. Her little author biography, I was like, damn, knows French, knows Russian, lived in Russia for a long time, lived in France for a long time. And then I read Hamlet by William Shakespeare. This is the first time that I have ever independently, not for school, read an entire play by William Shakespeare. This edition is written kind of in the original Old English. There's no kind of equivalent translation beside to, you know, show you what it means in modern English. I found this a very interesting experience to read this and picture, you know, 16th century actors on the stage acting this out and the audience being like, yeah, cool, I get it, I get what these people are saying. Because there, at times I didn't get it. You can definitely understand Shakespeare being something that you have to have a fair bit of background knowledge about the language that they used in that time and the context of the time to fully get it. And there were definitely times when I was looking at the writing and I was going, whoa, holy moly, that's really good. Like, what a metaphor, what a way to kind of get that across without just saying it. But there were times when I was kind of going, okay, I'm missing something. And I know that there are editions of Shakespeare where they'll kind of put a modern English translation next to it. So I would be interested to read more Shakespeare plays in that way, because I felt like that was stopping me from being connected to the story a little bit, as someone who's never been taught how to read Shakespeare. And it did, yeah, so I feel like I'm not qualified to say too much about it. I don't read a lot of plays either, so this was the first play I've read in a really long time. It did put me in a little bit of a reading slump after reading that book because I was tired, which wasn't really helped by the next book, which I ended up DNFing, which was Temeraire by Naomi Novik. I thrifted this book because I've heard a lot of good things about Naomi. It's kind of based around Napoleon era world history, and it follows a sea captain who captures another ship which has a dragon egg on it, and what happens when that dragon egg hatches. I don't know if I'll go back to reading this one, if it maybe just wasn't quite what I needed right now. I really enjoyed the dragon, so the dragon is Temeraire. I thought it was a very endearing dragon. It was kind of looking at the world with fresh eyes and questioning everything after it hatched, and I enjoyed reading that. I found the main character, Will Lawrence, to be annoying, and I know that I think he was kind of supposed to be written as very in the times, you know, he's kind of looking at people who don't have proper English manners and going, oh, I was just annoyed a lot, and it felt like things that didn't needed to be described in a crap ton of detail were, of kind of the author not leaving enough room for me to fill in with my imagination what something looked like or what someone's history was, and I got a bit bored, and I could feel that I was in a reading slump, and if I kept trying to push myself through this I was just going to stop reading. So I decided to DNF it for now. It's got a really cool cover, and I'm a sucker for not only dragon books but books based around the ocean, so I was quite hopeful for this. Don't know if I'm going to go back to it, probably not. So yeah, okay, that's it. Those are all the books that I have read so far in 2024. There's some really kind of chunky ones there. There's a fair bit of variety. They do kind of all look nice together, the spines. They kind of match a little bit. Yeah, it's been nice to be able to talk about what I've been reading again. I've definitely missed it. To finish up, I'll tell you what I am currently reading. The book I'm reading right now is actually the book I started before the third Sarah J Maas House of Flame and Shadow book came out, and it was the book I put on hold to read that freaking book, and for some reason after that I felt like I couldn't, maybe I was associating it with tregging through that book, so I felt like I couldn't get back into it as quickly, but now I am. I'm currently reading Silas Marner by George Eliot. I thrifted this really beautiful Reader's Digest copy, which feels really nice to read, and I am very much so enjoying it, so I look forward to being able to talk to everybody about it in my next wrap-up. What I'll do from now on is I'll probably do wrap-ups, not monthly, but when I feel like I have enough books to talk about, just because things are busier now. Let me know what you're currently reading. Well, yeah, thank you for listening to me go on and on about the books I've been reading. Feel free to stick around if you enjoy the rambling, but I hope you all have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.